560theanswer.com.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
By the way, nice use of the word ancillary.
Oh, can we put that on a magnet? Words with Amy?
On AM 560.
Your magnet will be Word with Amy.
The Answer.
Dan and Amy, we talked about this op-ed in dailysignal.com last week. And I've tweeted it out, too, at Dan Proft. You can check it out. I also mentioned it when I sat in for Dennis Prager on Friday last week. But we've got the author of the piece. This is Jamie Schupe. It's an incredible story, and frankly, a courageous story told in this piece. I was America's first non-binary person. It was all a sham, not just because of detailing all that he went through. And I mean, you can't help but have great empathy for him. By the way, a man who served our country in the military for 18 years. But also because of what he is running into politically in the sort of totalitarian, cultural Marxist America in which we live, where you are forced to genuflect at the altar of anything that emanates from the LGBTQ plus community, such as it is. I was America's first non-binary person. It was all a sham. There's abundant online literature informing transgender people that their sex change isn't real. But when a licensed medical doctor writes you a letter essentially stating that you were born in the wrong body, and a government agency or court of law validates that delusion, you become damaged and confused. I certainly did. The best thing that could have happened to me, writes Schupe, would have been for someone to order intensive therapy. That would have protected me from my inclination to cross-dress and my risky sexual transgressions, of which there were many. Instead, quacks in the medical community hid me in the women's bathroom with people's wives and daughters. The medical community is so afraid of the trans community that they're now afraid to give someone an honest diagnosis, essentially what he's saying. And he talks about the traumas he has endured prior to and throughout this process of going, frankly, from living as a man,
then going to...
He's a man.
Yeah.
To woman, to non-binary, as validated by an Oregon court, to now a man. And we're pleased to be joined by Jamie Schupe. Jamie, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So,
how did this all begin?
You know, we should do something that really hasn't been covered, and we should go back to 2007. In 2007, I was rated 100% total occupational and social impairment due to symptoms such as gross impairment in thought process or communication, persistent delusions or hallucinations, grossly inappropriate behavior, persistent danger of hurting yourself or others, intermittent inability to perform day-to-day activities, disorientation of time and place, memory loss of names of close relatives, own occupation or name. That's the description of my 100% disability rating from the Department of Veterans Affairs in 2007. You're probably thinking that sounds pretty bad, and it is.
Can you go? Can you take one step back too? Because I want to get through the traumatic events in your life, but take the step all the way back to the first traumatic experience.
That would be my childhood sexual abuse.
Yeah.
Yeah, my childhood was terrible. I was abused sexually by a male relative. I was beaten by my parents. I was exposed to a lot of violence. And it kind of set me up for having PTSD later in life.
And then, but, you just mentioned all those conditions and hardships. When did you convince yourself, because before you became non-binary, you became a woman. And how did that happen?
Well, in 2011, 2012, I went through a severe mental health crisis. And I literally, destroyed a property that I had bought. I got into a big spat with the builder. The builder wouldn't fix it to my satisfaction, and I destroyed it. And the builder sued me for $3.5 million. I ended up living in hotels for 6 months. After that, I ended up on the internet because I didn't want to repeat this thing again. And I started diagnosing, okay, what is wrong with me? Why am I acting like this? and I stumbled upon gender dysphoria and transgenderism and convinced myself that I was a woman.
And that was something that was were you seeking per what happened to you as a child, the exacerbation of that, as you described after you were discharged from the military, during your service in the military. Were you in therapy? Were you talking to medical professionals to work through some of the issues that we described? You described, I should say.
No, basically when the VA gave me the 100% rating for mental health, I was just on my own after that. It didn't come with therapy or anything like that. Yeah, so I was just cast adrift, and yeah, I self-diagnosed myself on the internet.
And then when you self-diagnosed, then did you like seek a professional for validation or confirmation?
Yes, I made an appointment with a nurse practitioner, and I chose her because she could write prescriptions. And I had downloaded documents from the Department of Veterans Affairs Hospital, basically, instructions on how to become a woman. And I went to that appointment with the nurse practitioner, and I basically threatened her. I mean, she should have put me in the psych ward, but I was like, if you don't give me hormones today, I'm going to buy them off the internet. And unbelievably, she wrote me a prescription, and I started them that evening.
Wow. And did you ever consider getting the operation where you'd physically become a woman or try to?
I did. I was sold this package of beliefs that all I had to do was change over my operating fuel from testosterone to estrogen, get one of those genital surgeries where they transform my penis into a vagina, and then I would be the same thing as any other woman. That's the myth that I bought into with this. But I later came to see all the people that were having like horrendous complications from these surgeries, and that was part of the turning back mode.
But this was being underwritten. The hormone that you were taking. So this is being underwritten by the VA. You're getting this from the VA, from the government.
Yes, the VA played I would say 80% of the role of getting me into this mess.
Do you realize being a woman isn't so easy?
Yes, I in hindsight, I do. I'm very regretful about the whole thing. I'm very apologetic for the harm I've caused to women. Yeah, that's a funny thing. I did a tweet recently, and I said the definition of gender is where you pick and choose the things you want from the opposite sex without having to take on the problems of being that sex.
Very good.
So, okay, so you're going down this path of living as a woman, and what turns you around, or not turns you around necessarily, but turns you off of that to then seeking an identification as non-binary?
Well, a couple of years into it, I just realized the total thing was a failure, that I was just basically a sex stereotype of a woman. The hormones had never did anything to make my body really look like a woman. I was basically a male with a wig on and a dress. And I just realized how phony the whole thing was.
And how did people treat you?
They treated me like a male in a dress wearing a wig.
Yeah.
So then you realize that, and then the thinking behind the decision to pursue really a change in the law that has now spread in the country to be designated as non-binary and have the state so sanction it via your birth certificate.
Yeah, I bought into a lot of thinking that sex is a spectrum rather than a binary, which I no longer support that thinking at all. And that was part of it. And the other part of it was, how do I get myself out of this mess that I've created respectfully? And that just seemed like the route to go. I regret it in hindsight. I've cost the taxpayers millions of dollars, and then I'm ashamed of the whole mess.
And you were hailed by the LGBTQ plus community as a hero for establishing this third gender option of non-binary or X. It marks the spot, as it were, until you weren't. Explain the being a political celebrity for that community and then not being.
Yeah, I support the president's ban against gender dysphoria, and I'm against transitioning children I don't believe these surgeries are fixing anybody's problems, and they're certainly not changing anybody's sex. And once you voice those opinions, you go from hero to zero almost immediately.
And it's remarkable too. I mean, what is the reaction? What is the defense for what we see now on morning shows? 8-year-olds parading around as transvestites or transitioning, and parents even going that next step to actually physically alter their children because the 8-year-old boy says, "I want to be a girl."
I mean, I consider it as child abuse. Okay, but we have to look at the situation these parents are in. It's just like me. These folks have people with medical licenses telling them that this is what's good for their children. I mean, as hard as that is to believe, that's exactly what's going on. And worse than that, they're willing to turn child protective services loose on people who don't go along with this, which is another reason I speak out and I support these parents who refuse to do these modifications to their children.
How are you doing now?
An honest statement would be I feel like I just spent 6 years in Jonestown and made it out on the last plane.
Really?
The last piece of this, you went from the non-binary designation, and then you said, well, that's not a fit either, and then you returned to being the man that you are. How did that happen?
Yeah, the guilt of the situation just weighed on me more and more. I couldn't outrun my biological sex. It was basically, I guess we could compare it to giving me psych drugs. It was like these identities were like trying out new pills, and they never did fix my underlying problems. And I felt guilty that I was leading people's children down this path to make them believe they could escape their problems by taking on fake identities. I felt guilty about the millions of dollars being spent. And I just I have to tell the truth about this. And I returned to my birth sex.
Wow, good for you. Thanks for your courage.
You conclude your piece by saying, "I'm not the victim here. My wife, daughter, and the American taxpayers are. They are the real victims." What is your relationship like with your wife and daughter?
Unbelievably, my wife hasn't left me. I feel horrible about the things I've put her through. But despite that, she stood by my side the whole time, and now that I have reclaimed my birth sex, she continues to do that. So she deserves a big commendation for all of this.
I'd say.
Yeah.
What have you been able to connect with other people who have, through experience, come to the same position? I think of like Walt Heyer, for example.
Yes, I talk to Walt a couple times a week. Walt has become my spiritual advisor. Yeah, sadly there are a large number of us in this exact position, and much of the media doesn't want to acknowledge that we exist. Yeah.
But you feel like now you're in a stable place mentally, much better than certainly the last 6 years.
Oh yeah, it's much better to live as your birth sex and be recognized that and not be fighting society and living in a false reality.
He is Jamie Schupe. He was the first non-binary American. His piece, "I Was America's First Non-Binary Person. It Was All a Sham." It's really must-read stuff at dailysignal.com. Jamie, thanks so much for joining us, and thank you for telling your story and sharing it, and obviously we wish you the best.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook, or read about it in the paper. Hear it here first. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.